Please enjoy this original recording of the Mini Bible College, also known as MBC, hosted by the author himself, Pastor Dick Woodward, in the 1980s. International Cooperating Ministries is privileged to make his timeless Bible lessons available. Each weekly episode is 30 minutes. Together, these sessions create a 3-year curriculum. This practical walk through the Bible is nurturing believers and equipping disciples speaking 31 languages in more than 50,000 small group Bible studies around the world. Now, here's Pastor Woodward with the Mini Bible College.
And he said unto his disciples, There was a certain rich man which had a steward, and the same was accused that he had wasted his goods. And he called him and said unto him, How is it that I hear this of thee? Give an account of thy stewardship, for thou mayest be no longer steward. Then the steward said within himself, What shall I do? For my Lord taketh away from me the stewardship. I cannot dig, to beg I am ashamed. I am resolved what to do, that when I am put out of the stewardship, they may receive me into their houses. So he called every one of his Lord's debtors unto him, and said unto the first, How much owest thou unto my Lord? And he said, 100 measures of oil. And he said unto him, Take thy bill, and sit down quickly, and write 50. Then said he to another, And how much owest thou? And he said, 100 measures of wheat. And he said unto him, Take thy bill, and write 80. And the Lord, that is the employer, commended the unjust steward, because he had done wisely, for the children of this world are in their generation wiser than the children of light. And I say unto you, make to yourselves friends of the mammon of unrighteousness, that when you fail, they may receive you into everlasting habitations. He that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much. And he that is unjust in the least is unjust also in much. If therefore you have not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, who will commit to your trust the true riches? And if you have not been faithful in that which is another man's, who will give you that which is your own? No servant can serve 2 masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. And the Pharisees, who were covetous, heard all these things, and they derided him. In the 16th chapter of Luke, we have 2 parables of Jesus about rich men. And both of these parables should be seen in the context of the manifesto that we have been considering in our first 2 sessions in our approach to the Gospel of Luke. According to Luke, Jesus began his ministry with a manifesto, and that manifesto outlined for us his mission, his ministry. His mission and his ministry, according to his manifesto, was to proclaim his message, his gospel, in such a way that those who were spiritually poor, in the sense that they were blind, bound, and broken and bruised, would see, be set free, and be healed. Now, in the Gospel of Luke, we have seen that Jesus proclaims this manifesto in Luke 4. He proves it in Luke 5. He practices it all the way through the Gospel of Luke. And we see in the Gospel of Luke that Jesus is constantly turning to people and extending this challenge to them. Will you become partners with me in the implementation of this manifesto? We see this as he recruits the apostles like Peter and challenges them to catch men rather than fish. And we saw it in our last session in Luke 15 in the parable of the lost things, where Jesus said to that outer circle who were unhappy about the fact that lost people were being saved, will you not come in and participate with me in what's going on in this inner circle where the lost are being saved? Some of these people, Jesus said, are like lost sheep, some are lost coins, some are prodigal sons. But he's appealing in Luke 15 to the elder brother we saw, and saying to the elder brother who is the religious establishment, all heaven's rejoicing when the lost are saved. Why aren't you rejoicing when the lost are saved? And why are you like that elder brother who's angry and will not come in and participate with me in what's going on in this inner circle? Now in Luke 16, which of course follows the parable of the lost things, Jesus gives two parables about rich men. The first one seems like a negative illustration, but it's really a positive statement about participating with him in his Nazareth manifesto. And then that second story he tells about a rich man, the rich man and Lazarus, is a very negative statement about being a participant or a partner with Jesus in the implementation of his manifesto. This first parable is called the parable of the unjust steward, and it confuses many people because many people feel that in this parable Jesus was commending an embezzler, but that's misunderstanding the parable. The parable is about a man who has a steward, which means a manager, a treasurer for his corporation. Here's where we get one of the important words of the New Testament. The Old Testament teaches tithing, it teaches giving offerings which are beyond the tithe. It teaches making sacrifices which cost you something. But when you get to the New Testament, the word is steward. And the concept of the word stewardship is you're not supposed to cut Jesus Christ in for 10% of the action or give him 10% of what you have or what you gain. Everything you are and everything you have belongs to him. And the issue really is management. Are you managing what he has committed to your trust? Now this includes your money, but it also includes your talent, your time, your energy, your gifts, everything. The issue really is management. Now, there is a story here, and it's just a story. Remember, the story is supposed to make a point. A man who's wealthy has a steward or a manager, and he hears that this man's mismanaging, wasting, perhaps embezzling. And so he tells the manager or the steward that the CPAs are coming in, the auditors are coming in, and they're going to go over the books. Now this steward sits down and has a little talk with himself. He says, now, right now, I have power, I have control over my master's money. But as soon as those auditors go over the books, I'm going to be fired and I'm going to lose that control over my master's money. Now what can I do? He thinks about his options and then he says, I know what I'll do. So he would visit with these people who were indebted to his master. And then at the end of the visit he would say, you know, I've always liked you and I'd like to do something nice for you. How much do you owe my master? Well, 100 bushels of wheat, they would say. Well, you know, I've always kind of liked you. Why don't you just write out a check for 80 and I'll mark your account paid in full. Same thing with those who owe 100 barrels of oil. Well, when he leaves these people, they say, thank you so much. And he says, I'll be seeing you. And of course, that's the whole idea. His strategy is this. He's looking out for his future. He's saying, right now I'm living in this one sphere where I'm employed and I have this control over this money that isn't mine. Now, his bright idea was this. I'm going to use this money which isn't mine in such a way that when I'm fired into that next dimension, where I'm out there without a job and without this power over this money, I will have made friends who will gladly receive me into their houses and show me hospitality when I have no place to go. Now, when his employer hears about this, he doesn't commend him because he's an embezzler. He commends him because he was shrewd enough to think about his future. The Phillips translation says he was commended because he thought about his future. Well, the point is really very profound. Jesus says, you are just like that steward. Everything you have really belongs to somebody else. You're just managing it. Now, just as that steward knew he was going to be fired, you should know that one day you're going to die. And one day you're going to hear these words, you may no longer be steward. Now, give an account of your stewardship. You see, just as this unjust steward really believed he was going to be fired, you should believe that one day you're going to die. Now, the fact of your death, what influence should that have over your attitude toward what you possess, or even what you are? Well, it should have a tremendous effect on the way you look at those things. Remember in Ecclesiastes, where Solomon was seeking after the purpose and meaning of life, he tried riches, and he became the richest man who ever lived, but one day he faced his riches with the fact of his death. And he said, one day I'm going to die. And who's going to spend all this wealth I've accumulated? I will have no control over that. It may even be a fool who spends all this wealth I've worked so hard to accumulate. When you face your material wealth with the fact of your death, it should have a lot of impact on how you value material things. And here is the application to the parable. It's very profound. This steward lived in two dimensions. First, he had a job, he had power and control over this wealth, but he knew he was going to live in another dimension soon where he would not have the authority or the power over that money. While he was in dimension number one, he used his control over that wealth in such a way that he made friends who were willing to receive him when he got into the next dimension. Now, the application Jesus makes is this. You're living in this dimension now. You have life, and you have a certain amount of wealth. You have gifts, talents, energy, health. Now, you are the steward of all those things. You're managing all those things. They belong to God, but you're managing them. Just as the steward was fired, you're going to die. And one day you're going to lose control over all of this. Now, here's what you should do. Just as the unjust steward used this wealth that wasn't his in such a way that he made friends in the next dimension, you should use what you have in such a way that when you go into the next dimension, meaning the eternal state, you will have friends ready to welcome you into their eternal habitations or living places. Jesus said, in my Father's house there are many dwelling places. This is the concept. In the next dimension, in the eternal state, there are many places to live. There is such a thing as an eternal habitation. Now, he that winneth souls is wise. That's probably what this parable is saying. Use this that you have control over in this dimension in such a way that when you die, there will be people in the eternal state who will welcome you into their everlasting dwelling places, and they perhaps will say to you, you know, back there in 1975, you gave $1,000 to a missionary in northern Luzon, and that made it possible for him to put gas in his Jeep and go on a missionary journey. And on that missionary journey, I found Christ. And I wouldn't be here in this eternal state if you had not managed your mammon of unrighteousness faithfully. In other words, this parable is saying, you can't take it with you. Somebody has said you can't take it with you, but that's just about the only place you can go without it, you know. Well, you can't take it with you. That's the bottom line, you know. You can't take it with you, but this parable seems to be saying you can buy shares in heaven, and one way you buy shares in heaven is you manage your mammon of unrighteousness or your money in such a way that the kingdom of God is extended, the church of Jesus Christ is built, people come into a saving knowledge of Christ because of the way you've managed your mammon of unrighteousness, and in that sense you're making friends in the next dimension. You can see that the thrust of the parable fits in with the theme of chapter 15. Again, Jesus is saying, will you become a participant with me in the implementation of my manifesto? I have come to give sight to the blind. I have come to give freedom to the bound and healing to the broken and bruised. I have come to give salvation to the poor. The Spirit of the Lord has anointed me to do that. Now, will you participate with me in that? Will you be a partner with me in that? Now, there are many ways that we can be partners with Jesus in the implementation of his manifesto. One way is stewardship. One way is faithful stewardship. Somebody has said 75% of the teaching of Jesus is on the subject of stewardship. That doesn't mean that 75% of his teaching is on the subject of money. But it does mean that about 75% of his teaching has to do with this. What are you doing with your time? What are you doing with your life? What are you doing with the things that make up your life? Your energy, your talents, your gifts, your health, and of course your money. All those things that make up your life. Are you managing them? Are you managing them in such a way that you could be called a faithful steward? You see, it's not a matter of tithing, really, when you get to the New Testament. It's much more than that. It's all his. And one day the question will not so much be, how much did you give to God? but why did you keep so much for yourself? Why did you spend all that money on yourself? That was my money. Why so much on yourself and so little in helping me implement and apply my manifesto? What is a faithful steward anyway? Just as sure as that unjust steward was going to be fired, one day we're going to hear the words, "You may no longer be steward," and the next thing we'll hear is this, "Now give an account of your stewardship. How did you manage all that which I entrusted to you? Did you manage it in such a way that you became a partner with me in the implementation of my manifesto?" You see, this really is a very positive statement, because in a very negative way, here's the picture of a man who shows us it's possible in a very positive way to participate with Jesus in the implementation of his manifesto. And here you have this very serious application. Once you get all this in focus, you have this application. He that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much. And he that is unjust in the least is unjust also in much. If therefore you have not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, which means money, who will commit to your trust the true riches? What this is really saying, frankly, is this. God won't bless us spiritually if we're not faithful in the way we manage money. This doesn't mean that every Christian has to do like the rich young ruler and give away all of his money. In fact, this may teach the opposite. This may teach that a Christian would be a very astute businessman, a very good manager, who would perhaps be a billionaire because he's a good manager. But when he becomes a billionaire, it all belongs to God. And his whole motivation for becoming a billionaire is that he might be a partner with Jesus in the implementation of his manifesto. Now that's a very positive statement. And that's followed by a negative statement. He tells another story about a rich man. He said there was a rich man who fared sumptuously every day, and he was clothed in purple and fine linen, lived in a mansion, couldn't have had it better in this life. And lying at his gate there was a man named Lazarus, and he couldn't have had it worse in this life. Now if you think of this little parable like a 3-act play, that's Act 1. Here you see the rich man sleeping between silk sheets every night, faring sumptuously every day, feasting at his banquet table. And every day when he goes out through his gate, here's this beggar lying at his gate, dogs licking his sores. He couldn't have it worse. The rich man couldn't have it better in this life. The poor man, Lazarus, couldn't have it worse. That's Act 1. Now Act 2 is the death of both men. They both die. That's what Solomon said again in Ecclesiastes. One thing happens to all of them. The rich men, the smart men, the fool, everybody dies. That's the great common denominator. So the rich man dies between his silk sheets and his mansion, and he's buried with great pomp and ceremony. Lazarus dies lying out there at his gate, and it says he isn't even buried. The sanitation crew comes by and picks up his carcass and throws it on a cart. And his carcass is probably dumped on the great garbage dump called Gehenna. That's one of the words Jesus uses for hell, the idea of waste, refuge. His body's just thrown on that garbage heap, that's all. That's Act 2. They both die. But when the curtain goes up on Act 3, you get to the point of the parable. Now they're in the next dimension. And that beggar Lazarus couldn't have it better. He's in Abraham's bosom, which means he's in intimate fellowship with Abraham. And that rich man, he's in hell. And he couldn't have it worse. He's in torment. Now there's a great separation, a great gulf fixed between these two men, and it's irrevocable. Nothing can be done about it. And the rich man is told that. He's told that there's a great gulf fixed between you and Lazarus. He says, "Oh, Father Abraham, let Lazarus dip his finger in water and come and touch my tongue. I'm tormented in this great flame." But he's told, no, there's a great gulf fixed between you and Lazarus. And those that would come from where Lazarus is to you cannot, and those that would go from where you are to Lazarus cannot. It's fixed. Now when he understands this, he has a great concern for his 5 brothers. And he says, "Oh, Father Abraham, let Lazarus be raised from the dead, and go tell my 5 brothers so that they won't come to this place of torment." And here's where you get a great compliment for the Old Testament, for the law and the prophets. The word comes back to the rich man, well, they have Moses and the prophets, let them read them. And he says, oh, but if somebody were raised from the dead, they'd believe. And the word is, if they won't believe Moses and the prophets, they wouldn't believe somebody who was raised from the dead, like Lazarus. Well, this parable is a very forceful, awesome parable. I think some of the most awesome words that are spoken to this rich man in Act 3 are these words, son, remember your lifetime. Now, whatever the eternal state is going to be, and this is one of the most awesome pictures of the eternal state, this is where we get the concept of hellfire and of eternal damnation, eternal retribution, eternal torment. Perhaps one of the worst things about this is that he has a memory, and he's got a whole eternity to remember his lifetime. His lifetime of 50 or 60 or 70 years. What did he do with his lifetime? You see, this follows in sequence the parable of the unjust steward. God gives each of us life, and we are managers of that life. Not just our money, that may be the least of it. Our life, our time, our energy, our gifts, our talents, our health. Now the issue is, what did you do with your lifetime? You had a whole lifetime on earth. What did you do with it? Remember your lifetime. Remember that for 1 billion years. Just think about that. Your lifetime. All through eternity, remember your lifetime. All during your lifetime, you couldn't have had it better. Lazarus couldn't have had it worse. And you cared nothing about Lazarus and all the problems that he had. You see, this is the great negative illustration. The parable of the unjust steward says, again, will you become a participant with me in the implementation and the application of my manifesto by faithfully managing your life and everything that's entrusted to you? Now, this parable of the rich man and Lazarus, this is the awesome illustration of the man who would not participate with Jesus in the Nazareth manifesto. He absolutely cared nothing at all about the Lazarus lying at his gate. Well, the application, I believe, is primarily social. I believe people fixate here upon the details about the eternal state, and this is where we get the hellfire and brimstone preaching. I believe the challenge of this great teaching, again, is this. Will you become a participant with Jesus in the implementation and the application of his Nazareth manifesto? Will you participate with him in giving sight to the blind, freedom to the bound, and healing to the broken and bruised people of this world? Notice in the Gospel of Luke how many, many times and in how many places Jesus is doing this. He's challenging us to become partners with him in the implementation of his manifesto. In Luke chapter 10, Luke is the only one, as a physician, who gives us the parable of the Good Samaritan. He says that a man is mugged and he's left in a ditch. He's wounded, bleeding, he's been robbed, and people come by and see him in that ditch. First a priest and a Levite come by, and they look at this man in the ditch and they say, you really got a problem there, bleeding to death and everything, but see, I got a problem too. I'm late for church, and I'm all scrubbed up for my devotions, and if I touch you, I have to go back and wash up again, and I'm just not going to get involved. And they pass by. But a Samaritan comes and he sees the man in the ditch, bleeding to death. And he bandages the wounds after pouring in oil and wine, puts him on his animal, takes him to an inn, and he says to the innkeeper, he gives him money and says, here, if you need more, when I come back again, I'll pay it. That parable of Jesus, called the parable of the Good Samaritan, somebody has said, teaches 3 philosophies of life. The first philosophy of life is pictured by the thieves. Their philosophy is, what's mine is mine, and what's yours will be mine, just as soon as I can take it. There are many people in the world with that philosophy of life. That's why we have police. That's why we have a military presence. John Kennedy said, you can't negotiate with people whose attitude at the negotiating table is, what's mine is mine, and what's yours is negotiable. Well, the priest and the Levite, the religious people in that story in Luke 10, they picture this philosophy of life. What's mine is mine, what's yours is yours. I have my blessings, you have your blessings. I have my problems, you have your problems. You really do have a problem there, bleeding to death and all. But, you know, live and let live. Mine is mine, yours is yours. Now the Samaritan, and this is the point to the parable, the Samaritan, Jesus said, he had this philosophy of life: what's yours is yours, and what's mine is yours anytime you need it. Now that won't make you rich, but that's the philosophy of Jesus about the Lazarus lying at your gate, about a world that's hungry and a world that's hurting. That's three different philosophies of life. And as you understand the philosophy of life Jesus was teaching from the parable of the Good Samaritan, again you see him extending an invitation, saying to us, look, I have a manifesto, I have a mission, I have a ministry. The Spirit of God has anointed me to perform that ministry. And I want people to become partners with me in the implementation and the application of that ministry. Will you become a partner with me in the implementation of my manifesto, my mission, my ministry? I believe that's the great challenge that this beloved physician, Luke, presents to us in the way that he presents the Christ to us in the Gospel of Luke. Luke was a physician. He was a man with a social conscience. He was a man who saw human need in medical terms, in physical terms. He presents to us the humanity of Christ, the human touch, as he presents Christ to us. And primarily he presents to us the mission and the ministry of the Messiah in that context. Will you be a partner with Jesus in the implementation and the application of his manifesto and his ministry? That's the challenge of the Gospel of Luke.
For more information on the Mini Bible College, please visit www.minibiblecollege.org or call 1-800-999-3892. International Cooperating Ministries is located at 1901 North Armistead Avenue in Hampton, Virginia.